Executive branch agencies have about a month left to submit their reorganization plans to the Office of Management and Budget for review. The steps they take to create those plans will determine whether OMB blesses them or offers guidance to revamp them. Steve Goodrich writes about the construction of those plans. He's CEO of the Center for Organizational Excellence and author of the book Transforming Government: From Congress to the Cubicle. Steve, thanks for coming on the program. You're writing about this plan in GovExec, and you write that you'd like it. Why so?
It's one of the most comprehensive plans ever to come out of OMB, and it requires everything from vertical programs to horizontal programs, cross-agency programs, developing the government workforce as well. It's very comprehensive.
You've got 12 suggestions in your GovExec piece for implementing this, for making it work. A couple of them jumped out at me. The first one that I think is noteworthy is number 2. It should begin with a national summit that results in a strategic plan. What would you like to see covered at that summit, and what would you like the strategic plan that comes out of it to look like?
Well, it's been many years since the government has gotten together, and that was when they defined and created the Constitution. It's time now, after many years and the government going in many different ways, to come out and decide what the purpose of government is and let that drive the reform initiatives in what we do.
The next recommendation I wanted to ask you about is that accepting that some investment will be necessary. Is that just the concept that it costs money to do reorgs, you won't see the return on investment right away, or is there more to it than that?
Well, sometimes the government's afraid of investing and not knowing what the return is. I think they need to require agencies to define the return on investment and bring it back, but they can't be afraid of making investments.
That might be hard to sell in the environment that we're in fiscally right now, right?
It may be, but we got to change the way we think and act in order to make this happen.
The next suggestion I wanted to ask you about is leveraging what you have before you throw anything out. That's essentially, sounds like an inventory, making sure you know what all of your resources are, right?
It is, but it goes beyond that. There's sharing that's necessary. You know, there's an agency over here that has a major system that can help the agency over here, and they don't always know it. Let's really understand what we have. And secondarily, shared service is a big part of this. We have a lot of systems. We've started down the road of shared services. Before we go too much farther, let's understand what we have and what we can leverage before we start building anew.
Before we start building anew, though, are there places where shared services are not being leveraged to their full extent, their full potential right now?
There are. You know, it started down the road in HR and finance and payroll and those kinds of things. But there's systems out there, there's technology to support. There's agencies that like to say we do it our own way when 95% of what they do can be core. And so it's not just technology, it's bringing the systems and processes together.
Another suggestion you make that I want to ask you about is fixing the foundation. And you write, civil service reform, procurement reform, and management reform will be essential to lasting success. What does reform look like in each of those 3 buckets, Steve?
Well, if you look at civil service reform, you know, everybody wants to do wholesale, and you got to take it pieces at a time. But if we start looking at respecting, rewarding, and causing performance in our government, we create a procurement system that can move quicker and more accurately. We need to look at this both piecemeal, piece by piece. Category management is actually a wonderful thing, but it requires agency procurement officials to have expertise in what they're procuring. We need to move further down the road to do those kinds of things.
One of the things that may be involved there then when it comes to the reform of the civil service is providing paths for people to continue to be technical experts rather than having them to have to be promoted to management in order to continue to grow in their careers. Is that
Exactly. I think you have to have those paths, but you also have to have people that do go into the management roles, understand their PD, if you will, and both live up to it and perform up to it and make sure they have the skills and resources they need to perform.
The last suggestion I want to ask you about is reorganization must address vertical and horizontal programs. Is that where we're talking about breaking cross-agency stovepipes, or are you getting at something else there?
Well, within agencies, we have everything from drug control to educational grant programs. Those are the vertical programs, the mission-focused programs. But we also have a lot of horizontals, and that is the procurement and the finance and the HR that needs to be addressed. And we need to bring those together because there's a lot of efficiency to be gained there as well.
The back office challenges have been many, and they've been well known for years. Do you see something in the Trump reorganization plan that you think will be different than some of the reorganization efforts that have happened in the past if it's leveraged to its full potential?
Well, it does require, as I said in the beginning, a cradle-to-grave view, and they are expecting look at vertical and horizontal programs in that process. So it is very comprehensive. OMB has to stick to their guns in their review, make sure they have good stringent criteria, and June is coming up, and they're expecting ideas, but in September is the big report. And it needs to be as comprehensive as it can, but it has to look at realistically how much time it needs to take. There may need to be a statutory requirement, and you have to involve Congress in this because it's going to involve changing legislation.
Steve Goodrich, thanks as always for coming on.
Thank you, Francis.